Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony.
And I'm Raymond Peterson.
Raymond Peterson. And
we'll get this together one of these days.
And I'm their guest and friend, Alan Singer.
Thanks again for joining us, Dr. Singer, educator, historian. We're taping this Media Watch session the Wednesday before our Monday air. And it's being brought to you by the good graces of EVT Educational Productions, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and Zoom's facilities, capabilities. And so we'll jump right into it. The weekend before, not this past weekend when we aired that Monday, July 2nd, I believe, you had this, I think, Patriot Front march that took place in Boston. And it basically caught the city of Boston by surprise, which surprises me because I always thought you had to apply for a permit to have a march, demonstration, whatever they wanted to call it. But it turns out that the Patriot Front folk, and I should double check to make sure I'm not misrepresenting, because there was an alleged assault by the group on a Black man during that particular march. And so the mayor is now saying the alleged assault should be prosecuted to the full extent of the law, says Boston's Mayor Michelle Wu. And so my question, guys, is Patriot Front, right? I believe they're on the list of supposed white supremacist racist group that's been put out by any number of people who watch those groups, right?
I wouldn't be surprised if they were on the SPLC's list, the Southern Poverty Law Center's list.
Yep. Well, they were marching with T-shirts saying "Reclaim America," and they were in masks. And so because they were in masks, or all in masks with whatever T-shirts they were wearing and whatever they were doing, a lot of flags, Reclaim America, when they assaulted this man, they claimed they couldn't identify them too well. And so, but because, quote, there's lots of video of what was happening, they're avidly pursuing this alleged assault and going to try to bring them to justice. We'll see. I got a thing about the city of Boston. I mean, the state of Massachusetts did make DeVal Patrick one of the first Black governors in the United States of America. So that goes a long way to abrogating and ameliorating Boston's long history of racism. But how could they get a permit to march? But I don't,
The Southern Poverty Law Center lists them as the #1 white nationalist neo-Nazi group in the United States. So you're right about that, Eric.
Yeah. So if you're trying to change your image from being a racist town, I would think you would look twice at somebody called the Patriot Front applying for a permit. Maybe they applied for the permit under a different guise. I don't know. But the fact that if they're the #1 white supremacist neo-Nazi group, why did the city of Boston not have any intelligence on these people when they, one, applied for the permit, 2, did their march, and weren't prepared for somebody getting assaulted to the point where they couldn't seem to break it up, or got there after the fact and didn't have anybody to arrest and couldn't track anybody down because they had masks on? I'm just saying.
But isn't the permit holder ultimately responsible for whatever happens during the march that you got the permit for? If there was a permit holder.
If there was a permit holder, maybe they marched without a permit. There's a lot of questions about that. The fact that they were doing this march on the 4th of July holiday weekend to quote Reclaim America. I'm just throwing that out there, folks. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because they haven't arrested anybody yet. But in this whole slew of white supremacist craziness, let me just transition to the fact that the Highland Park shooting, you got some crazy guy who's dressed up to look like some wacko or whatever. I don't know who he's imitating. It looked like some other vigilante kind of whatever. When you see the picture of him, it reminds you of some movie villain of someplace. I can't even pull it out of my head. But Highland Park is a predominantly Jewish suburb. outside of Chicago, Illinois. And the fact, Ray, I think you were mentioning the fact that this same crazy guy tried to get into a synagogue. What was that?
He did. That was, I'm not sure of the time frame. It wasn't right just, within the week of this happening. It was at least a month ago, I
No,
believe.
it was during April, during the Passover
Was it
holiday.
April? Oh, okay. Yeah, he was refused admittance because of the way he looked. They thought he looked a little fishy and they didn't let him in. Thereby preventing, 50, 60, maybe 100 people from being killed. Bravo for them. They were on the lookout. But that didn't work for him. So he decided, well, I'll go to this predominantly Jewish neighborhood, wait until there's a mass of people out in the street, July 4th, and shoot them. And that's exactly what he did.
Bob, what are they saying? But I mean, they're investigating motive. What's the cops
What
saying?
motive? I mean, what motive are they looking for? He got a bad sandwich. I mean,
I just want to hear what they supposedly are saying about their investigation. I mean, Bob,
what are they saying?
As of this morning, when I listened to it on 1010 Wins on the news radio, the police had gotten a number of statements out of him already about what he wanted to, about where he was and where he was going and things like that. But they've been tight-lipped about the motive. The police haven't, at least as of the last.
Well, come on, I think we know what the motive was. I mean,
I think I do too. Yes, Ray. Yeah.
Alan,
We're looking at guns and violence and hate and right-wing groups kind of permeating our society. And again, what's so crazy is that we're looking at, again, with the Supreme Court, which is empowering these people just to get more guns. The man in Highland Park bought those guns legally. And, they're saying we should do background checks. His parents his father vouched for him buying those rifles. I mean, this is insane. To have a Supreme Court that says, well, it's okay.
You know something about that?
there are other things.
Highland Park passed a ban on assault weapons back in 2013. Highland Park's ban was challenged by the NRA or whatever. It went all the way up to an appellate court.
With the sunset law.
The appellate court said this law is legal. And so they said, no, NRA, go away. And the law is still on the books in Highland Park. Clarence Thomas wrote some sort of dissenting opinion about the fact that the Supreme Court refused to take up that NRA appeal.
Right.
And Clarence Thomas says, oh no, most of the law-abiding people who have these weapons, they use them for sport. And it's not, it's a ban that should not be in effect. In essence, he disagreed with the fact that the Supreme Court didn't take up.
He said
That was back in 2015, however. The fact that this current Supreme Court has just destroyed New York's permit law and allowed people to be carrying guns left and right. If that law came back up to this Supreme Court now, tell me what you think they would rule on that, Alan.
But this is the thing, and this is what's so scary. Chicago area is the worst gun violence in the United States, and Chicago has relatively strict gun control laws. The problem is guns cross state lines.
Yeah.
The Indiana has virtually no gun control.
Right.
You can purchase a gun legally in Indiana, and an hour later you could be in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
New York and New Jersey just passed very strict gun control legislation in an effort to
counterbalance that crazy Supreme Court ruling.
But the problem is guns just pour in. Illegal guns are they follow the pipeline from the South. You have these ghost guns. You have guns that are now being made on the 3D printers.
Yep.
And I don't think the founding fathers, when they wrote the Second Amendment, were considering 3D printers and ghost guns, let alone automatic death machines. But to have a Supreme Court, and I don't even like to call them conservative. These are not conservatives. These are extremists. These are reactionaries. To promote this idea puts all of our lives at risk. the three of you as black men and me as a Jew. This is very scary.
Yeah, we've gone round and round on this Supreme Court Second Amendment interpretation, and the fact that they're making the Supreme Court trump every other amendment, Second Amendment, trumps the First Amendment, or whatever we have for freedom of the right to be personal safety. All different interpretations and different amendments all seem to get negated by the courts and their new, quote, originalism document. And so these Trump judges, I think you referred to them as Trump judges, Ray.
Sure, I refer to the Supreme Court. I no longer
Trump Court, whatever.
Trump Court.
We have a problem when we start talking about these original interpretation, originalism, and the whole bit that can negate the 14th Amendment, can negate the person's right to privacy. All these things that unenumerated, we were talking about these unenumerated rights before. If they go to their cherry picking of the quote originalism doctrine, then a lot of other rights that we thought we had are going out the window. And that's as a result of this new court. And I call it new court because those last three Trump judges added to Roberts and added to Alito gives us a 6-3 court that's hell bent on turning back rulings that they don't like personally, whether it's from religious bias or conservative bias or whatever. And so they're cherry picking these doctrines and these interpretations. And I think Sotomayor wrote it in a dissenting opinion. These are now judges who are ruling by judicial fiat, not by constitutional interpretation. So
I think years ago, Eric, you and I went back and forth about Justice Roberts. I kind of thought that he was more of a he would defend the Constitution. I thought that he would at least seek the middle ground, and use his position as chief judge to be sort of a moderating factor in the court. That might have been the case in his first, week in the court, but now, no, I see what you were talking about. Frankly, he's at the moment when he ascended to that position, he was in the position of a moderator. But yeah, now he's on the right with the rest of the the right-leaning judges, and we have today's problem.
Every one of them lied at their confirmation hearing, and every one of them should be removed in a functioning government. They lied when they said their commitment was to precedent. They lied when they said their commitment was to evidence. They are ideologues. They are religious extremists. I sometimes I joke that I'm a real originalist and I'm a real textualist. And then what I do is I read the preamble to the Constitution, and it's worth reading. It starts, "We the people of the United States, not we 6 unelected judges, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility," not gang violence, but domestic tranquility, "provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare." Gosh, maybe that we don't need killing machines everywhere. "Secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity," and maybe to women and African Americans also. "Do ordain and establish a Constitution of the United States." When we read it, it doesn't say what they think it says. And that we have to reclaim our Constitution.
So here's my question, Alan. Is the preamble an integral part of the Constitution? Can we claim it as an integral part of the Constitution? Or will some conservative, ultra-conservative say, but that's not the Constitution. That's just the preamble to the Constitution. I can hear them arguing that right now.
And that brings in the same question, the Bill of Rights. That's not part of the Constitution.
But that's why I raised that earlier.
Okay, but the Ninth Amendment very clearly states that even rights that are not expressly listed, you remain within the context of that preamble. And the 14th Amendment says to reinforce the preamble that all people should receive legal process and fair treatment.
Due
And
process.
what Thomas did, they threw out the 14th Amendment. They threw out the 9th Amendment because they like the second one. But that's not what it says.
Yeah, my question is, what makes the Second Amendment superior to the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment, the 9th Amendment, all these amendments that the Second Amendment infringes on when they read and interpret it to its ultimate extreme, which is what they're doing.
Their right-wing political ideology.
Yes,
That's
I'm
it.
saying what makes that amendment preeminent to these other amendments, and somebody needs to be able to challenge that over and over again, as
Well,
opposed to just
you see,
saying
Eric,
it's settled.
You see, Eric, those other amendments are inconvenient at the moment.
Yes.
And so they're just kind of pushed out of the way. I
Okay.
mean, they're there, they're effective, we haven't thrown them out, but they're inconvenient. So,
So
yeah,
Raymond, that brings us back to what I think you and Alan were talking about before, about the courts for almost 150 years. Most of their decisions were in support of white supremacy.
Yes.
Whether it was Dredd Scott, whether it was Plessy versus Ferguson, whether it was, what was that, I guess it was Heller that decided that these guns could be held by anybody.
No, it's very true. The right wing argues that somehow the Warren court in the 1950s and 60s, really up to 72 in Roe, was a liberal court, activist court.
Yeah.
And that's just not true. What we have is a history of very right-wing conservative courts. And what the Warren court attempted to do was to return to the real meaning of the 14th Amendment. What happens in 1883, a right-wing court in the civil rights cases actually threw out the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments and said that segregation was legal and no one's rights African-American people's rights didn't have to be respected. And that was how the court established it, until the Warren court said, wait a second, that's not what the 14th Amendment says. The Warren court returned to original intent. The Warren court returned to the text. But these reactionaries, they're just right-wing political ideologues. And it's very scary.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm sorry, but just to point to their lunacy, in the New York State gun case, Clarence Thomas actually favorably quoted the majority opinion in the Dredd Scott case. I mean, that's absolute lunacy.
Remind people the significance of Dredd Scott. That's the one where it said Black people have no rights that any white person needs to recognize in this country. That was the preeminent, let's kill Black people, make them non-citizen. And how did he quote Dredd Scott favorably to push his agenda? It was,
What he said was, Tawney wrote that if Blacks were accepted as citizens, they would have a right to own guns. But interestingly enough, Tawney did not argue that the Second Amendment prevented regulation of guns. He just wanted to make sure that Blacks didn't get them because he wanted a white monopoly on gun violence.
right. Somebody else has written recently that the Second Amendment is all about making sure Black people don't have full rights as citizens and shouldn't be walking around with guns. That's why everybody's pushing a Second Amendment so big. I'd have to dig into that, but I throw that out there, folks. You can look into
Any of these mass shootings, have any of them been perpetrated by a Black man or any person of color?
Back in the day, I think there were some brown people that were shooting some people up in California or something.
Back in the 60s, maybe.
Wasn't there a father and son in Virginia.
They went through-
Oh, yes, I know what you're talking
There was
about,
a
the
sniper
interstate
in the
shootings.
Maryland, Virginia
Yes.
area. That's correct.
Yes.
That's correct.
But
Predominantly, Raymond, I know what you're coming from. Raymond, predominantly it's young white males. This
Yeah.
White men.
yeah,
is somewhat off kilter.
it's bad.
So that's why Lindsey Graham and his buddies keep saying, "Oh, we have to deal with mental health. Not let's ban these blasted AR-15s and the like. Let's deal with mental health. It's mentally bad people that are killing us all the time."
Well, maybe we have to just preeminently lock up all 18 to 24-year-old white men to protect the rest of us, except for my grandson, because
One thing that a lot of these kids had in common were they were outcast, they were bullied as children, they felt alienated, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a mental health component here somewhere.
I'm not knocking the mental health part of it. What I'm saying though is, if you fix all the mental health stuff, if you put AR-15s out there, people would be going out and shooting people with the guns. If you ban the guns, doesn't matter if they're sick or healthy.
Right.
Because it's a ban, they can't kill that many people.
Right.
Well,
Crazy
just
people
one
without
point.
guns don't shoot anybody.
And just one point about the shooter in Highland Park. I mean, he wasn't an outsider. He might have been outcast and he might have been bullied, but I don't know if it was his grandfather or his granduncle ran for mayor in Highland Park. So he's part of the community, and he was well known within the community, including by the mayor, current mayor, who ran against
The
mayor Cremo.
The mayor, I think he was in one of her Cub Scout dens or something. The mayor was his Cub Scout mother. I mean, he's an integral part of that community. No,
That's what I'm saying.
I'm with you on that. I come back to ban them. You banned them in the 90s. You let it expire because of the NRA. Ban them again. Whatever it takes to ban them. Don't tell me it's unconstitutional. It's not. You knew it was constitutional, ban them before, and that's why you didn't take it up back in 2015 when you refused. I'm talking about the Supreme Court. You didn't take it up because you knew Highland Park had a right to ban assault weapons, which they did successfully. They still have that ban in effect, by the way.
You know, one
The
of the
surrounding
things
communities, as you said, out in the surrounding states don't have similar laws. People can go across state lines, go into other communities, buy the weapons, and he bought the weapons legally, just like Highland Park guy. But we need to move to a couple of other things before we run out of time.
We have about 5 minutes, Eric.
Okay, in 5 minutes, let's remind people of a couple of things. Speaking of shootings, gun goes to guns. The Palestinian Authority did not like the supposed US investigation of the bullet that shot the Palestinian American journalist. She's a US citizen, but Palestinian by birth. Abu Akleh, the female journalist that was shot.
Yes, Shireen Abu Akleh, yes.
99% basically that it probably came from an Israeli position. The US government, their investigative team said, the bullet's too tough for us to be 100% sure that it came from an Israeli weapon, but we think it probably did. And then they added gratuitously, there is no evidence that they may have fired that bullet deliberately. Well, if you're investigating the bullet, how are you going to find intent? By investigating a bullet. So that was a gratuitous statement that they did not need. And as a result, I'm quite sure that's why the Palestinian Authority said, well, we're not that happy with your investigation. So thanks, but no thanks. So that's on that story that we wanted to update our people on. There was this other story in Texas that we cannot not go. Tell me a little bit about the Texas school, Alan. You're the educator. What did they say?
Well, this was one of the weirdest ones in the history of school censorship. But Texas doesn't want to include discussion of slavery in the curriculum. So they're trying to come up with a euphemism. And the euphemism they came up with was involuntary relocation. Now, they backed off because it made them look ridiculous. But they were saying, well, the Africans were involuntarily relocated. And
brought here as workers.
Yeah,
Hey, that's right. Remember that? We talked about that about 4 years ago. The African workers back, what, what, 2014, 2016?
Yeah. Guaranteed full employment.
Guest
Yeah,
workers.
and they receive room and board.
Guest workers.
And they were fed. They were fed, sort of.
Texas never stops coming up with a new way to not talk about slavery as slavery, and calling enslaved people guest workers. That's a new one. The other one I think deals with education again, and that's of course the impact that Florida's LGBTQ don't say gay law is already having on educators and students in the Florida school system. Alan, you probably saw something on that.
Well, the thing is, teachers don't know what to do. And that's what's so ridiculous. The law prohibits instruction that is not age appropriate. But the reality is, what's age appropriate? You know, so in first grade, students are supposed to learn to treat people with dignity. They're supposed to compare families and communities. Well, if they're comparing families and communities, they discover there are different kinds of families. If they're treating all people with dignity, they see that all people have rights, but they're not allowed to mention the people that have rights. So, and again, that is, I'm quoting from their first grade standard.
That's what I'm assuming. They're saying that's what you have to do, address in the first grade. But
Yes.
they're also saying with this new law, you can't deal with anything about LGBTQ between kindergarten and the third grade. Right. So that's why teachers are confused.
And again, when teachers teach about other kinds of families and gender identities, they're not teaching about human sexuality. They're teaching about families. There are blended families. There are families where kids are adopted. There are families that have two parents of the same gender. This is about teaching about diversity. This is not about teaching about sex. And that's what Florida doesn't get, at least their elected officials.
No. We have about 40 seconds.
They get it. That's the scare tactic stuff. That's how you get your people riled up. Oh, they're indoctrinating your kids with sexual education in kindergarten, which is a lie, but they believe in the big lie. But I guess we're out of time. We're going to have to leave it at that. Another example of the big lie being perpetrated across the country, screwing people's lives up. This has been Media Watch, folks. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait.
I'm Bob Anthony. Catch up to us on YouTube and Twitter at Media Watch EVT.
I'm Raymond Peterson.
And I'm their friend and guest, Alan Singer. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again, Dr. Singer. Folks, we'll catch you the next time. Be well, stay safe. It's still some kind of endemic going on out there.